everyone, this is Aika, the Accountability Coordinator. I have Kevin Scheller, Maureen Fry-Brun, Karen Striegel, and Taylor Bagley here as well. Okay, let's get started. So today we are going to walk you through the ISA-IDEA participation appeals process. If you want to know more about the participation rate appeals, please review the user's guide available on the participation rate appeals application. This webinar is recorded and going to be posted on the appeals application. During this presentation, I'm going to read off my transcript so that Taylor doesn't have to transcribe the recording later. Please type your questions into the Q&A box as they arise. Before I start, I'd like you to know that our mission at the Idaho State Department of Education is to provide the highest quality of support and collaboration to Idaho's public schools, teachers, students, and parents. If you have any questions about the presentation or anything else, please feel free to contact us. Today, I'm going to cover the background, how to appeal non-participants for an exemption, and how to report COVID-19 related non-participants. Before we discuss the appeals, let's talk about the underlying motivation of why we do what we do. Both the federal and state government require all students in relevant grade levels to participate in ISAT or IDEA. Why do you think this is? Say your district has a set amount of resources to allocate to each school. School A tells you that they tested the top 10% of their students and obtained 99.9% proficiency rate in math. On the other hand, School B tells you that they tested everybody and obtained 50% proficiency rate in math. As a district leader, how would you know which schools would need more support, training, and resources? Do you need more data to decide? Did they have performance goals? Although the testing data does not and should not determine who you are as a person, as a school, or as a district, it should be offered to everybody and should be comparable in order to target our limited resources and to prioritize our work. So both the federal and state government require all students in relevant grade levels to participate in ISAT or IDEA. We provide an equal opportunity and everybody is eager to participate, right? Maybe? In reality, we always have challenges. Students not showing up, parent refusing. I'm sure you have more examples. So both the federal and the state government said, let's make 95% as a more realistic goal. For groups of 10 or more students, the number of non-participants should not exceed 5% or 2 students, whichever is greater. Per Idaho administrative rule, this 95% goal has been in place since 2004. That said, we understand this year was especially challenging for everybody to achieve that 95% goal. Because of the pandemic, both the state board and federal government waived any consequences associated with not meeting a goal. As a result, the participation rate this year will not affect measurable progress in ISAT and IDEA proficiency, and proficiency rate will not be reduced by the percent of students who did not participate. So you may ask, and some folks have already asked me, why we still care about participation rate when all the bureaucratic requirements have been waived. First, to clarify, the ideal vision, as we discussed earlier, are still in place. What has been waived is any consequences associated with not meeting that goal. Second, the participation rate is still posted on our report card at both state and federal levels. Third, as we discussed earlier, we are also concerned about data comparability. If you had 20 students who have been sick and absent for the entire testing window due to COVID-19, we'd like it to be reflected in your participation rate and its historical trend. And lastly, please help us estimate the impact on the statewide assessments caused by COVID-19. COVID-19 related appeals cannot be approved and will be denied. However, we would like to know if you had 50% of your students and their parents refuse testing due to COVID-19, for example. Before I move on to the next section, do you have any background questions?
Somebody asked, will you be sending out this recording to all participants today? And we will have that available on the YouTube channel and on the participation rate application in the next few weeks.
Now let's talk about how to appeal non-participants for an exemption. Remember, both the state board and the federal government have a vision of testing all students. Who are these students? Let's define all students a bit more. Technically speaking, all students for the spring of 2021 included students enrolled on or before April 30, 2021 through May 28, 2021, or the last day of school as reported via IC, who were not exempt from testing. There are 5 ways for a student to be exempt from testing. First, as you guessed from the technical definition, if a student was not enrolled on or before April 30th, 2021 through May 28th, or the last day of school, the student is exempt. In other words, if a student exited before April 30th, enrolled after April 30th, or enrolled on or before April 30th but exited before May 28th, or the last day of school, then the student is exempt from testing. If the student's IC enrollment date was out of range, the exemption is automatically applied. In addition, if a student was considered foreign exchange, private, or homeschooled, the student is exempt from testing. If the student was coded correctly via IC, the exemption is also automatically applied. Similarly, if an English learner has been enrolled in a U.S. school for less than a year, the student is exempt from ELA literacy testing. If the student was coded correctly in ELM, the exemption is automatically applied. Lastly, if a student meets the special exemption criteria, the student is exempt. These special exemptions need to be manually applied to the student, and the purpose of the appeals window is to manually apply these exemptions to eligible non-participants. So then what are those special exemption criteria? These exemptions are for those students who were absent for the entire testing window or were homebound due to a documented medical reason, students who face some extenuating circumstances like death in the family or house fire, and lastly, students with incorrectly recorded IC enrollment attendance or ELMS data. You would need to create an appeal in the appeals application during the appeals window to manually exempt these eligible students from testing. The appeals are accepted from July 12th through July 23rd in the assessment participation appeals application. We are actually still waiting to receive the alternate assessment participation indicator from the vendor. We will let you know if we need to push out the window. The application is pretty self-explanatory, but I often hear from people who cannot access the site. Please contact your district technology director to gain the accountability appeals coordinator role in the admin tool. We, the assessment staff, do not have access to the admin tool and cannot provide you with a security clearance. Once you're in the app, please find your district and school, verify missed targets of 95% participation rate, and create appeals for non-participants who should have been exempt from testing. When creating an appeal, you'll be asked to select an appeal reason. Medical emergency and other extenuating circumstances are the 2 only approvable exemptions. We also have NA in case you need to appeal one subject, but not the other. In the next slide, we will discuss what each appeal reason is for. First, medical emergency is for students who, due to their illness, injury, or existing medical condition, were unable to attend school during the entire testing window or are unable to participate in in-person testing and the school did not or could not offer remote testing. The examples of medical emergency include students who had been absent for the entire testing window due to contracting COVID-19, medically fragile student who was eligible for in-person alternate assessment because alternate assessment was only provided in person if the existing medical condition prevented the student from coming into the building, the student is considered exempt. Medically fragile student whose testing accommodations required in-person testing. Again, some of the accommodations required in-person testing. If the existing medical condition puts the student at risk for coming into the building, the student is considered exempt. Student who lives with a medically fragile family member and did not have access to remote testing is also an example of medical emergency. For any student who was absent, meaning zero attendance, for the entire testing window due to illness or accident, please explain why the student was absent for the entire testing window. For any student whose illness, injury, or existing medical condition prevented the student from participating in in-person testing, please explain how such circumstances prevented participation and why the school did not or could not offer remote testing to that student. To complete the medical emergency justification, you must submit a letter from a physician confirming illness, injury, or existing medical condition. You may also submit a homebound IEP that outlines existing medical conditions. Other extenuating circumstances for student was not reported correctly via IC or in ELMS, or student who had tragic and unexpected event for which school administrator granted a special exemption. The examples of other extenuating circumstances include students who have been absent since mid-April but did not exit till May 1st after holding a seat for 2 weeks. School administrator granted a special exemption for students who faced tragic events such as losing close relatives to COVID-19, being in a car accident, or being in a house fire. For any student whose IC or ELMS data was incorrect, please explain why the IC or ELMS data does not reflect the reality and why the student should be exempt. For any student who faced tragic and unexpected events, please explain how the event prevented the student from participating in in-person or remote testing, and why the school administrator decided to offer a special exemption. To submit other extenuating circumstance appeal, you must either correct IC or ELMS data, or submit a copy of communication trail with the family confirming or discussing the circumstance. NA is really to catch all. This option should be only used when you like to appeal one subject but not the other. What I mean by this is that it is moot to submit NA appeals to us as we cannot approve it. You should not submit any NA appeal just to show us the student did not participate. NA example is this. Say a parent refused testing due to the student's pre-existing medical condition with a doctor's no. You provided math assessment remotely, but could not provide ELA literacy assessment remotely because the student needed to receive an accommodation only provided in person. Now you can submit medical emergency appeal for ELA literacy because 1, you have a doctor's no, and 2, you cannot offer remote testing. But say the parent refused to coordinate the math remote testing due to either technical deficiency or disagreement with math standards. In this case, non-participation for math is not medical emergency, and you would need to submit an A for math. Similarly, if the school lost track of math remote participation progress, then that is not a medical emergency either. You would need to submit an A for math. For NA student, please explain the situation. It does not have to be extensive as we cannot approve an A. For NA, you don't have to submit any documentation. Part of what NA means is that you don't have any supporting evidence. Before I move on to the next section, do you have any questions or on how to appeal non-participants for an exemption?
I don't see any questions, Ayaka.
Great. Let's move on to how to report COVID-19 related non-participants section. Objective: by collecting COVID-19 related non-participants, we would like to estimate the number of pandemic-related non-participants who do not meet the special exemptions criteria described in the earlier slide. The question is, if we had not had the pandemic, how many more students would we have been able to test? To answer this question, we're asking you guys to report COVID-19 related non-participants to us this year. In this unusual year, we'll provide 2 different ways to report information describing reasons for students not having taken assessments due to COVID-19. Please do not double report using both methods. The first is the standard appeals application used to document circumstances that may be granted an exemption. You can also report non-exempt COVID-19 related circumstances that prevented participation in this format only for informational purposes. The second is a new option, provided to all schools to submit batch lists of students with COVID-19 related reasons for non-participation reasons that will not be exempt but will help gauge the breadth and nature of COVID-19's effect on assessment participation. We'll review each separately, starting with the formal appeals application. In the appeals app, you can report COVID-19 related non-participants by selecting COVID-19 related appeals reasons. Again, although the word appeal reason is displayed on the screen, we're not accepting appeals for COVID-19 related non-participants. We are only gathering COVID-19 related non-participants for informational purposes. Quote-unquote appeals for those COVID-19 related non-participants will be recorded but denied upon the closure of the appeals window. In the application, you'll find 3 COVID-19 related non-participation reasons: COVID-19 refusal, COVID-19 closure, and COVID-19 quarantine. In the next slide, we'll discuss what each appeal reason is for. COVID-19 refusal is for students whose parent refused to have him or her test because of the global COVID-19 pandemic. If you have a medical documentation for the student and the school did not or could not provide remote testing, please submit medical exemption instead. If a classroom, school, and/or district closure due to COVID-19 prevented the student from participating in testing with no remote testing options in place, please select COVID-19 closure. COVID-19 quarantine is for a person with confirmed case of COVID-19 came into contact with school personnel, student, parent, or family member that necessitated in student quarantine with no remote testing options in place. Here are some examples of COVID-19 related appeals reasons. Parent is concerned that the student with no existing medical condition would be exposed to a deadly pathogen by participating in in-person testing. This would be considered a refusal unless the student has an underlying medical condition for which you can provide a doctor's note. In-person testing was canceled due to a series of COVID-19 outbreaks resulting in a school closure with no remote testing option. This will be considered closure. Student was in quarantine after an out-of-state travel with no remote testing option. This will be considered quarantine. For COVID-19 related appeals, you do not have to type in a detailed information as they will be denied. However, justification is required in the appeals application. Some short phrases like parent refused, school closure, and quarantine would be okay. For COVID-19 related appeals, you do not have to submit any documentation. Before I move on to the next section, do you have any questions on how to report COVID-19 related non-participants in the appeals application? Okay, let's talk about the new batch submission process. First, go to the participation appeals application and click on open the Excel template. Save the template on your system and read the instructions. You then enter data in the yellow section. You need to enter 1 child per line. For each child, report one of the 3 COVID-19 related non-participation reasons discussed earlier, or an A for each of the tests, ELA, math, and science. You can enter the data in either of 3 ways. First, 1 response at a time, choosing from the available drop-down options in all cells, except EDUID. Second, 1 response at a time, typing your data directly into the cells. And lastly, copy and paste a line or full data set from another location. Valerie, the new accountability coordinator who is out today, coded the template such that it detects and informs you of any format errors. If you are typing data and there are errors, you get errors directly in the cells. If the spreadsheet detects duplicated EDUIDs, you will see red text directly in the EDUID cells. You may also see errors in the columns to the right on the same row. When you see no red errors in your file, your file is complete. Move to the next step. If your file contains school-level information, please save and name the file with CVD appeal, your school's name, your first initial and last name, and the date of submission. If your file contains district-level information, please save and name the file with CVD appeal, the district's name, your first initial and last name, and the date of submission. Examples are displayed on the screen. To finish the process, submit the file via Otis. When you're in the Otis, select ticket type, secure information, submission information, accountability. Contact the LEA's Technology Director for technical assistance. Do you have any questions on batch submission or of COVID-19 related non-participants?
I am not seeing any questions.
Well, this is wonderful. I scheduled an hour, but looks like we're ending in 30 minutes. Do you have any final questions? And we'll get back to you, Kelly, on the question that you had.
We'll stay on the line for the next few minutes in case anybody has any last-minute questions.
Great, thank you so much. Don't forget to visit us at spe.idaho.gov/assessment for more information and resources. Have a great summer.